Welcome to the archives of information technology, where we capture the past and inspire the future. It's Tuesday, the 17th of May, 2022, and we're talking on Zoom, as has become customary during the coronavirus pandemic. I'm Jane Bird, and I've reported on technology and IT for newspapers such as the Sunday Times and the Financial Times since the early 1980s. Our contributors today are Chris Hurst and Iain Johnston from the cybersecurity company Blackwired. Chris is currently Blackwired's Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer, while Iain is founding partner and managing director of Blackwired in the UK and Europe. Blackwired is bringing military cyber countermeasures and adversity disruption to the enterprise sector. It's currently engaged with the UK government and leading law enforcement on the future of oversight and attribution in crypto markets and cybercrime. Chris was previously a leading security practitioner at BT, where he acted as the virtual CISO with BT's largest clients. He was also head of security services, principal architect in identity, and the inventor of FedCore, a federated industry management capability, which became the model for the UK government identity insurance programme. Chris and Iain, welcome. I'm very much looking forward to hearing more about your experiences and insights into the world of cybersecurity and the dark web.
Hi.
So perhaps we could begin with how you got into all this, Chris. I know we don't want to go a lot into your personal background for this interview, but maybe you could give us a short synopsis as to how you arrived where you are now.
Oh, absolutely. So I've always been interested in compute from the last days of school, where I was in a computer club. They were building them actually, and through periods of time, I've gone through software design, product design, obviously into the security domain, and finally into cyber. Into cyber because it's an area that I felt that needed new concepts. And that's what I kind of position myself to do, because I like to look at big problems and provide solutions to big problems, and cyber is certainly a big problem area, as is crypto. So that's how I got here. I also got here by meeting some great people along the way. Some from the information technologists group, Vint Cerf, for example, the inventor of the internet, and Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web. And spoke to them about the identity FedCore program and how that would be the next organizing principle for the internet, so identity. So I'm always pushing the outside edge of the solution space, or the edge of the mind map.
Thank you very much. And Iain, how about you?
So I got into technology later than Chris. I got involved post the military and have been working in technology for 20 years, increasingly towards payment security, ID security, and now cyber. Chris and I have worked together for 20 years, and he kind of coached me out of the military in the first instance, and it's very interesting. What we're doing just now has shades of military tactics now applied to the cyberspace.
Thank you very much. So let's look at the dark web, if we could start there. What is it and what goes on there, Chris? Could you shed some light on this mysterious topic?
Yes, I can. So if I can contrast the dark web with the light web, that'll probably be a good place to start. So the dark web and the light web actually almost started on at the same time. So the light web began in 1989, if you like, with the World Wide Web. Obviously, Vint Cerf developing for DARPA It was DARPANET, which was actually a military application, a joint project with education, including UCL London, but also the US Navy. So that's where we get our internet protocol from. Basically, the light web is, as we know it, it's open, it's searchable. You can use a standard browser, and you can get around. It's indexed. And it's robust, and it was the robust part that Vince Cerf was looking for, because he wanted to make sure that if there was any attacks or disruption against communications in the US, then that communication would still be delivered by different routes around the network, the internet. So if I look at the dark web, it's effectively a closed, unsearchable area of the same ocean of ones and zeros. So basically, that same ocean we swim in, it's the same ocean that's used by the web, but it's all ones and zeros. It's the same, but it's closed and it's unsearchable. So it's not indexed, and it is cloaked. So all communication within the dark web is encrypted and ciphered, and as there is no indexing, or there is no searching in the dark web, in effect, you have to have certain bulletin boards of reference where you can go to access the dark markets. And this dark web is an industry, so it is an ecosystem that exists in a parallel world to the light web, or the world that we actually live in. So dark web, it's a parallel universe to do certain things. So there's marketplaces, there's communications, there's messaging and so forth, but it's all obscured.
Yeah. And so why is that dangerous?
Well, you could say that both light web and dark web are dangerous in of themselves, because it enables the very rapid passing of ideas, and at the same time it enables a certain attack surface. So we look at social networking and so forth. We look at Internet of Things. They're all in the light web, and they are dangerous because anybody in the light web can access those things and look at your baby monitor and all that stuff. So I think danger is all about the difference of purpose of the two networks. The light web, the purpose is to provide access to content, for commercial purposes, legitimate stuff, but also it has a side which has recently come to the fore, where it is actually being used to do different things. So there are websites for people trafficking, child grooming, sex trafficking, those kind of things. They're in the light space generally. So in the dark space, it is effectively, as I said before, a closed space. So to participate in the dark web, you have to have certain browser, the Onion browser. You have to.
Sorry, what browser?
It's the Onion browser tool. Yeah, so it's a different type of browser. You can't browse the dark web with Google Chrome or Microsoft Edge or any other one. So you have to go into the Tor with an Onion browser. So it's a special type of browser. So and in effect, what happens is there is an industrial complex behind that. There's no other way to put it, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But there is an industrial complex. Loads of things you can do some legitimate things related to crypto, which is absolutely fine. But you can do some illegitimate things related to cybercrime, terror, and so forth, drugs, weapons, those kind of things that you would not see marketed on the light web. So all that goes on in that closed space. So it is dangerous, but as I say, the surface web or the light web can be a dangerous place too. But just to be really clear about this, the reason I'm involved in this, and the reason I'm in this space really, is that all cyber violence, and I'll come on to that in a moment, is planned and prepared in the dark web. Yeah, out of sight, unobserved, and basically encrypted. So there is little or no identity or attribution within the dark space, and effectively there is no transparency over it. So there is a key difference between the light web and the dark web, is that on the light web we have transparency. It's in the sunlight, so we can see who's doing what to whom. In the dark web we do not. But the most significant thing is what I see as, and I'll come on to this just in a moment, a crossing of the Rubicon, and also a break cover aspect of the dark web. So as I said, most of the cyber violence is planned and prepared in the dark web. Yeah. Most of the execution of that violence and the effects of that violence is felt through the light web, so the internet, networks, and so forth. So in effect, there is a pernicious element which has become an industrialized element, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment, of the dark web, and that is where organizations are industrializing their attacks. They're creating weapons, they're buying, selling, and trading weapons, cyber weapons, 0 days, and what they're also doing is creating the infrastructure to launch those attacks. Maybe forward operating bases, as we would call it in the military, but basically they are intentionalities to say, I'm going to attack this organization and I'm going to build these components to do that. Yeah, so they'll be interestingly in the light web. So you'll have a public facing IP address, yeah, from which a cyber weapon is being launched, or malware is being delivered, or ransomware attacks are being delivered. So if you think about it as kind of a dark space, yeah, and a light space, yeah, in effect, we need transparency on the dark space, which is what I'm about. We also needed that transparency in the light space, and transparency forces a number of questions on us. What ethical questions, what moral questions, what human questions do we have to have about privacy, about surveillance, about all those kind of things, in the light web? But also, what if we don't have transparency on the dark web? And that's a critical issue, I think, for modern times. So we can't currently see that, with one exception, but I won't bring that out. The Blackwired does that. So we specialize in the observatory of the dark web, the dark space. So we look at that intentionality for bad actors, bad actor groups, the construction, if you like, of infrastructure and bases and cyber weapons, including malware and phishing attacks and so forth. So that's where we are. What's generally attacked, though, Jane, from the dark space and by bad actors, is the systems and processes of management control. So what we're seeing, and we've been seeing for some time, and I'll talk about one of those Rubicons that were crossed. We've seen attacks mounted against production facilities, aluminium alloy production in Norway, distribution facilities, an attack which had a lot of sideways problems with a file transfer service, a file transfer application called Axelion. And again, distribution, SolarWinds, which is obviously a distribution, a tool designed to explore and gather information about networks, but obviously you connect it and something that was good becomes something that's bad because it gets exploited by the bad actors in the dark space. So the three things that are attacked are production, distribution, and exchange. So banks, stock exchanges, and so forth. So this Rubicon that was crossed is that this Rubicon that was crossed in 2010, August 2010. The Pentagon declared that there was a fifth domain of cyber war of war fighting, and that was cyber. So there's been a fifth domain, obviously land, sea, air, space, and the US concept, but now cyber. And that's in recognition of the fact that, and that's where the genesis of Blackwired is that cyber, all the preparations, all of the planning is done in the dark space. And the Pentagon said, okay, well, look, we're being surprised too much in the light space. We need to organize around and create a cyber war fighting capability. And generally, that was in response to the fact that they couldn't see what was going on in the dark web. So, what happened also in 2013 is that one nation state attacked another with a cyber weapon, and that cyber weapon destroyed national infrastructure. So that's the first example of what is a kinetic result.
Which countries are we talking about there?
We're actually talking about the disablement of the Iranian nuclear program, and the general attribution is thought to be obviously the US, but that is the Stuxnet. The Stuxnet event in August, and that is the first time, and this is questioning Michael Hayden, who was the director of the NSA at that time, questioned the morality, the ethics, and the possible consequences of the use of cyber weapons at that point. So Michael Hayden and the group around him were examining those very things that I talked about in terms of transparency does force you to question, to question what you're doing. So that was a really significant Rubicon, right? So one nation attacks another one in a time of peace. Yeah.
So his question was whether it was legitimate to pursue this. I mean, like you might say, well, we shouldn't have weapons of mass destruction. That he was saying, well, we must ask ourselves, should we have weapons in this fifth zone?
Yes. Well, yeah, indeed. So he having declared that fifth domain in 2010, effectively that opened the door to all of those questions about transparency, certainly on the dark space, and the need for it. So my view was obviously looking at being somebody involved with Vin and Tim Berners-Lee development of the internet, and what would be the next organizing principle of the internet, which is identity. Where it comes from, the identity assurance program, as you mentioned, so Fed Core is around that. So discussing that with Vin, I firmly believe that once we've made that leap from World Wide Web, the next leap, if you like, for the internet will be identity, and transparency on that would force a number of questions into the open. Yeah. So how much of your identity are you fragmenting and throwing out into the light web? Yeah, there's some big questions there that I got involved in, and I provide some solutions for those things. But if you look at it in terms of the dark web, one of the biggest issues is going to be attribution. And basically any kind of enforcement. Yeah, so we do have a number of issues that are really at the heart of where we go with these things, and I think that the dark web and the crossing of the Rubicon between military grade fifth domain warfighting and bringing that into the enterprise sector, because the enterprise sector is producing things, making tea, making aluminium, making ice cream, and also distribution. So logistics, aircraft, ships, transportation of stuff, and exchange. Obviously, the monetary systems. So they've all become, unfortunately, targets for violence, cyber violence. So. The three types of violence that I see, there is instrumental violence, which is I want some money. It's ransom, or extortion. So it has an instrumental piece. And you see the headlines are everywhere in terms of ransom, from running from Colonial Pipeline through to other organizations. But also underneath that, there's what I would call expressive violence. So expressive violence is really looking beyond the instrumental violence of, let's say, a ransomware attack or an extortion attack on a Colonial Pipeline, but actually, what was that? What was the expression behind that attack? Was that expression of control over distribution? So interesting. That's where we're going. And the last one, obviously, which has been pretty recent, which is statement violence. Such as a statement violence, the Sunny Pictures attack, where North Korea attacked Sunny Pictures in retaliation of the release of the film The Interview, which is that's a Rubicon that's been crossed, if you like, where North Korea state attacked a public company, Sony Pictures, in response for the movie The Picture, or The Interview, sorry. And also you have you also have another attack which came in 2016, which was an attack on the Australian Defence and Government. That was done via a public company, private company, called Newsat Limited, and that was one called out again by Michael Hayden as a crossing of the Rubicon, which is where private companies and enterprise have become part of a cyber war. Yeah.
So, right. So these obviously are all quite significant threats, enormous threats potentially. And the question then is, what can be done about it?
Yes. Yeah, so indeed, what could be done about something that is planned, prepared in the dark space that you can't see, and then it appears as a surprise with some gory headlines about a Colonial Pipeline and that kind of stuff, those breach names and so on. So what we can do about it, though, is we can take the stuff that has been learned in the last 12 years from the cyber warfare battle space. So we can take those lessons, and they have been taken on by the Five Eyes, the intelligence community globally, and they called out last year that the biggest actually threat is actually going to be to those organizations, private organizations that produce things, distribute things, exchange things. So they have become targets for that expressive unstatement violence by other states. Yep.
Can you just clarify the 5 eyes? What do you mean? What are you referring to?
So the intelligence community kits with the MI. So the military intelligence for the UK, US, Canada, and others actually comprise the 5 eyes.
Right.
Yeah, I just gave you 3 of them, but that, if you get the picture. So actually last year. And we saw this, in Blackwired in terms of 0 Day Live. What we saw from around 2016 is a huge increase, a huge increase in the development of weapons and the preparations to act. We saw huge uptick.
Can you give some examples of that?
Yeah. In the preamble to the Ukrainian war, we saw cyber weapons created for the first time in 2022 at a rate of 5 per day. So, and those weapons were aimed at either spyware, disruption, denial of service, or that statement violence. We've also seen that used on both sides in that conflict, and this is obviously public information, so it's not something that is secret. But we saw actors switching their dark space actors switching their switching software switches to open up their weapons for the use of former CIS states. Yeah, and we saw weapons used to gather up in preparation in December for the gathering up of 35 million Ukrainian identities. Obviously, my interest in identity would be looking at that and thinking, right, okay, well, that's a very interesting preamble to any kind of invasion. So you have to know the people that you're invading. So those kind of things are obviously related to military, but we've also seen the development of polarized groups. So Russia, obviously Russia and Russian groups reforming, making alliances, creating a development pathway for their weapons and their infrastructure. To do a number of things, and this, by the way, I'm not singling out the Russians here. That there are other nation states that are doing that, but obviously they are private groups within those nation states that actually earn money from this. So we can see that money developing, but we can also see changes in their planning and their preparation that indicate that things are going to be attacked. We can see that directly from our platform. So we've seen that uptick of 0 days. So a 0 day, so if I can explain it, is something developed in the dark space that is actually an integrated weapon system rather than just a piece of code. So it will enable you to automatically launch a ransom attack or a denial of service attack or any other kind of attack, a spyware attack actually, or an attack on an exchange, a bank or whatever. But these are industrialized, robust working weapons that are continuously developed at a speed that our light web capabilities or our enterprise capabilities cannot possibly hope to achieve parity with. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm looking to do is to kind of redress that balance, because there is a very particular direction of travel that I've taken with Blackwired and 0 Day Live to produce prevention as opposed to detect and respond. So which is the general process of the way that we look at things. So as I mentioned right at the top of the interview, I would look at where does the world need new concepts Yeah, because the old concepts are worn out. We've not adjusted. We've not looked at them since 1989, 1990. So we really haven't. We also my interest in regulation and compliance from my role as a CISO is that we need to develop better regulation. But the only way we can do that is to get oversight of the data space, certainly in the dark web. And also in the light web. So we need to know what the data space is. Otherwise, we can't develop compliance notions. We can't develop enforcement, and we can't deliver consequences to those people that perpetrate the crimes, if you like, in the dark space. So it's a very interesting, complex, fast-moving, difficult, and hyper-connected space. Yeah, and I just want to make the point that those particular, the light web and the dark web is the same ocean of ones and zeros, which makes that whole space interesting. So, I sometimes talk about a red ocean of ones and zeros. We can only see and experience, less than 50% of it, which is what the light web looks like. The other 50% we don't see and experience.
That's an extraordinary idea, isn't it? Because intuitively, if there are bits and bytes, noughts and ones flying around the world on optic fibers or in going through sort of radio signals or whatever, the idea they can't be intercepted is counterintuitive. How can they? It is. If they can.
Yeah, it is counterintuitive, and I think that's the. That's a piece of thinking I've been doing in a little series called In the Future, and I just looked before this interview. I wrote in 2017. Yeah, in the future, extremely complex, tightly coupled systems and ecosystems will suffer the equivalent of a force 10 storm that will destroy it. Yeah, the high-speed volatility we are experiencing are the harmonics that precede that storm. So I think that so what I was trying to look at, I was looking ahead here to say, how can we get transparency? How can we develop preventative capabilities? How can we prevent identity, attribution, and so forth? That's where I was looking.
There is a potential there, is there? I mean, it's just one stroke. It strikes one. It's just a little bit parallel to the climate crisis in a way. Is it going to be Armageddon? Is it the end of the world? I mean, it sounds.
It is, and I want to look at that because I'm interested in those big problems, and those big problems require you to have to observe a huge data space, but also then look at what connections, how can I put it, what determinism can you allocate to those changes? So, for example, in climate change, you have weather systems and so forth, and you also have geological systems that might cause problems. So what do you do with that information? What do you gather up? What do you learn? How do you create it? And if you look at those things, we do put geological sensors and information gathering nodes, if you like, to provide us intelligence, knowledge, and other things about what's going on distance inside a volcano, for example. Why not apply that kind of philosophy to the dark web? Yeah, that's where I'm going. So what I think has happened, and it's going to sound very strange, but I think that we've got concepts of operations that use another military term that were good for 1990 or 1989. Yeah, they're not good for 2022. There's a lot of space between 1989 and 2022 for stuff that happened at midnight when you weren't watching or you could not observe, and that's what's happening in the dark space. So if you like, the spontaneous flash of disruptive insight that we're providing in terms of Blackwired 0 Day Live is we're looking that way. We call it left of bang, right? And the reason we did that is because of we knew that traditional military doctrine and methods, processes, and management of battles was failing in Afghanistan, and the U.S. Marine Corps Hunter program actually looked at what are the fine-grained things that we can find out. Who's standing where, who's watching what, who's building what, who's buying plastic tubing to put IEDs in, who's buying different electronic components and mobile phones to put it, who's doing that. So these are all preparations that we couldn't see before. So the Combat Hunter program brought those things into the sunlight. So the real actionable intelligence could be created from that. So don't do this, do this, save lives, don't get ambushed, don't get attacked. Yeah. So I looked at that philosophy and spun it round, if you see what I mean, to look at cyberspace. Just because the dark web is closed and unsearchable, not indexed and cloaked, does not mean that you can't get inside the dark web. Yeah, you don't have to see inside the volcano to see what's going on. You plant a sensor.
Say that again. You don't have to see inside a volcano.
You don't have to see it. You don't have to see inside the volcano to know what's going on. You just plant a sensor.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it tells you. It tells you what you need to know.
Chris, can I interject a couple just on a point? And the Jane, where you're trying to get to is this sheer scale. The thing about the Afghanistan that Chris refers to, despite the fact there were clandestine tactics, it was still very much in the light. What Chris is kind of illustrating here is the sheer scale of the dark web. These are industrial complexes. The Conti Group has their own building and an HR department, and approved the use of weapons, as Chris is describing, for use against certain other groups. It really is very industrial. Yet we don't see it, and I think there are those that still have a perception of it's largely amateur. It's not amateur, and the pace at which they operate. Chris's 1990s point is, if we don't react in the same way that military forces had to react differently in the 30s when they saw Nazi Germany finally building up its resources, if we don't react soon, there will be an overtaking of events. During COVID, for 18 months, the level of resource that was assigned to working in the dark web tripled, because people were working from home, they weren't getting paid, so they went and did other things. I really just want to re-emphasize the point Chris is making about the scale of the dark web and the enterprise that's sitting behind us, facing us.
Are you saying that they have bricks and mortar? In the end, the money has to come out somewhere, doesn't it? Are you saying that? They can't be totally.
Resources need to be applied to counter. Absolutely,
yes, it does.
I think
absolutely that's what we're saying.
Resources need to be applied to countering this in equal measure. The scale of technology that's coming in our direction, the cyber teams cannot be recruited fast enough. They can't build capability fast enough to match what's coming in the other direction. So there needs to be a real recognition that we are in. Chris uses the term, we're in an arms race, and we're not producing responses at the pace at which the adversary is operating. And the other element to that is that the enterprises who are hacked and otherwise often don't fully declare the picture. So you've got two things happening: is we don't see what's coming in our direction from the adversary fully, and we also don't have a declared position. In Afghanistan, if a soldier dies or somebody's been injured, much of what's happening in cyberspace is not being declared. And increasingly that is changing, but much is not being declared.
It's not being declared, absolutely.
Because banks and financial institutions and so on don't want to admit that they've been hacked, you mean, that sort of thing?
Yes, there are, which was the next part of where I was going, actually, is that there is there is no black box flight recorder on businesses to tell you what's actually happened. So, or what's happening actually. So, so again, it comes down to, how much transparency and how much can you observe of what's going on in the dark space, and how much you can observe of where what goes on in the dark web has actually caused or is causal of violence in industry. So it's a it brings us into a couple of things really that also as a data scientist I'm interested in, which is how much do we know about the size of the infosphere that is actually in the dark web, and what data is there that we can use, and the approach that we've kind of taken is to look at that problem in the same way that we would look at the Human Genome Project, or the Human Protein Project, which is mapping that and providing data and information for that. So if you look at it, the way that this thing is working is very much bioscience, or life science, because of the complexity in the interconnections, I think. So what we've looked at is what are the components? What are the things that we need to see? How do we get to see them, and how do we monitor them, and how do we turn that knowing into action? And two kinds of action. One is to inform regulators and authorities, which we're working with at the moment, about the cyber risk that they have. And the other one obviously is to defend enterprise, because the enterprise is largely on its own. It's spending an awful lot of money at a time when there's not an awful lot of money to be had. And organizations traditionally have said, well, look, cyber attacks, cyber problems have been, they're not my problem. They're GCHQ or they're MI6 or MI5. They're the government's problem. They're law enforcement's problem. But actually, we're not doing that well. So we're looking to provide that oversight, that observatory, and that data space necessary to deliver that view on which you can make better regulations and understand what's going on. It's because what we're seeing is, or what I said in the future, just another one, was countries will legislate on data accountability, transparency, and reporting. They will actually legislate that. So that's compliance with enforcement. Right now, we don't have much of either.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the issues is, I guess that you might, the military might have in Afghanistan is they do have enforcement capability, right? They need to have it so they can go and disrupt the adversary. Make sure the event does not happen, and you don't have to kill people to do that. You just have to not be there. If you see what I mean. I think we're approaching a very interesting period in cyber and information technology, where the technology is moving so fast. For the majority of time, that technology is driven by economic means, and that includes cybersecurity. It's actually become applied economics, because businesses cannot afford to continually invest at the level, let's say, that the US Sixth Fleet does at $600 million per year in cybersecurity or cyber warfare, actually. So what we're trying to do is to actually bring that thinking, and it is a thinking change, it's a sea change in the way that people look at things, bring that thinking to the enterprise. Obviously, our origins is military, so it is actually in that conflicts part. But I think I think there is that force 10 storm is coming, and I do believe this is the portent of it. But what we've done is we've created something that actually looks from a different way. You have to understand the data space that you're dealing with. You have to observe what's going on. You have to know the enemy. You have to know those enemies, and we have to get business and enterprise to realize they're on a cyber battlefield.
Right. Okay. And you're what to realize that's one thing, and but to be able to achieve that transparency is obviously a huge challenge.
Yeah. Well, that's with us. Right? That's with us. So we achieve the transparency, and the results of that transparency is intelligence leadership, and actually intelligence direct to enterprise. So at the pace at which we see those preparations, planning, weapon development in the dark web, we're already putting that prevention into enterprise, and that's a big difference.
By saying we don't know, none of us can tell what on earth's going on in the dark web. You're saying, well, actually, we can now, and we are beginning to do that. And
we can, and that's the revelation. That's the revelation, if you like. We can see that. We can see it, and
but that still doesn't solve the problem for businesses. I mean, okay, they know. You're saying, well, they know where the enemy is coming from or what the enemy is doing. That will help them to prevent the enemy. But will it actually? I mean, that's a different thing, isn't it? Being able to stop it. You can't necessarily.
It is. So you're absolutely right. So basically, again, coming back to kind of a very simple example, in September 1944, the first V2 rocket landed just down the road from me here in London, and that rocket went into space. It came down very, very fast, and the first we knew of that weapon's existence is when it put a crater in and killed 24 people. Yeah, it was a huge change. And right up until that point, that was actually a 0-day weapon. Yeah, and those weapons just don't appear. They are developed, they're honed, and that version that landed here in September 1944 was called A4. And A4 had an upgraded guidance system from Siemens AG, for example, that actually made it possible for that rocket to leave the atmosphere and come back.
Yeah.
And hit close to the target. So basically, what we do is we break down. We break down the methods of attack. We identify those. We identify where the adversaries break cover. So they break cover into the light web, public facing IP addresses. They use certain types of weapons techniques and tactics. They'll use certain types of malware. And actually what we do is we immunize customers against those things as they develop at the pace that 0-day. As I mentioned before, probably just under 1,000 0 days that we saw in 2021. And almost 45% of those were subsequent malformations or developments on that weapon. So if you think about them, if you think of the 1944 V2 weapon drops on London just down the road, had never been seen before. Well, shocked. Everybody's looking at each other and where does that come from? That was A4, and then after that there were several different variants.
Yeah.
That did different things, and as Iain said, you add components, right? They add components, and they buy, sell, and trade those weapons as if they were arms sales.
Mm.
If I could, I can see you scratching your head a wee bit there, Jane, on the weapons. If I a weapon in a cyber sense still has characteristics that break down into some key elements. Let's just call them the detonator, the firing pin, the barrel, right, of a weapon. And what Jeremy Sweeney, our founder, has done is applied those military analyst tactics to identify those in the weapons before they've broken cover, before they may be targeting particular vendors. The vendors don't even know about them. and by knowing how they're constructed, he can basically immunize by making sure the equivalent of the firing pin doesn't work. The barrel's twisted, the detonator doesn't work, or whatever the weapon is. But in cyber terms, it's called hash, URL, and bad IP. That's that. These are the elements. Then they don't work. They don't work. So they might land, but they don't go off.
Yeah.
And can you measure this? I mean, can you actually show return on investment?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think we are the first organisation to actually demonstrate that quite clearly. Not only can we demonstrate a return on investment, we can demonstrate an uplift of efficiency in preventing you're joining the victim pool for a cyber attack. So we do something called mark to market, where we look at 60 to 70 different providers, and we measure ourselves against them using clearinghouses, a clearinghouse to look at it called Virus Total. But basically we can measure it. It's the first time I've been ever to be able to measure my effectiveness of getting my organisation off the 0-day victim list and get them out the pool for that. But do that in a way that isn't scientific. It's consumable by the executives who are going to be answerable for the resilience of their organization in the world, in the new world. I mean, we're on our way. We're on a trajectory where enterprise is going to be forced, to play their role in terms of systemically important banks, for example, or internationally systemically important infrastructural banks, those kind of things. Critical national infrastructure, which is being redefined as we speak about what is it. So water, protecting water safety, reservoirs, distribution, and so forth. All of those things are now influenced by cyber. The method of control is information technology.
So who have you signed up? Who's paying you to do this for them now?
So we obviously have our origins in law enforcement and defence. So we're still paid there, but organisations are recognising that they have to do something else. So we're picking up different organisations that are providing services. They would include vaulting companies. They would include
what companies?
Vaulting. So basically, where you vault, you collect information. Yeah. So cyber vaults. Yeah. So vaulting companies are buying us because obviously they want to protect against the evolution of weapons, because they're being targeted very, very much, because they're a great big honey part of information. That
I mean, like data centers. You mean like
data centers? Absolutely. And as people move to the cloud, or they become hybrid organizations, those are the kinds of organizations that actually are starting to realize that their detect and respond stance isn't working.
So there are lots of ways to crack a nut, as they say, and there's many companies out there in the world of cybersecurity attempting to do things in different ways, aren't there?
Yes, there are. Yes.
Are you saying that yours is the only way to do this, or that you're the only people, or are there competitors of yours who are taking a similar approach? What's the situation in the market generally?
So in the market, I'm going to make a statement that we are the only organisation doing what we do, because what we have has been developed from the original cyber warfare programs in the US. It is a platform that has been machine learning and refining that intelligence, aided by cyber warfare analyst experts. Those people briefing the world on what this is, on what the dark web is, and what's going on in the dark web. Those are the people we've hired for 8 years. That's been their tradecraft and their capabilities have been embedded in a machine learning platform called 0 Day Live. So 0 Day Live looks at looks out at an observatory to see what's going on, the development of the weapons. We take the weapons, we deconstruct them, we create indicators of compromise. So basically, what happened, Jane, is each of these weapons has a signature. Yeah, and we obtain the signature, and we inject that into security architectures before that weapon is weaponized against you. We also do some other things, which is we sense the changes in the way that forward operating bases are created, infrastructure created, and we also send that information, those intentional assets, if you like, that are being used as part of the attack alongside the weapon, or to introduce the weapon more effectively. So we do all that. Not only do we do that, we create a single pane of glass for which you can observe that, and you can question that in English language. I'll come on to that in a moment. But also we send that protective data elements, those individual pieces of cyber DNA that are injected into your firewalls, your endpoint protections, your security SIEM information management systems, or your cloud compute architectural firewalls, all of that we send, and it is precision. Yep, it's precision, high confidence at the grade that is keeping the world safe at the moment for cyber warfare, but it's at that grade. So that's
right. So, well, just to, there's obviously masses of companies out there that have worked on cybersecurity for years. I'm thinking of companies like Symantec, Cisco, and more recently, the high-flying unicorns like Darktrace, for example, and lots of others, startups looking at, the whole area of cybersecurity. I mean, are you saying what they're all doing is wrong and what you're doing is right? Or
no, we're not actually saying what they're doing is wrong. What we are saying though is that all of those companies you mentioned, Darktrace, Cisco, Symantec, one of the big unicorns, CrowdStrike, they're only as effective as the cyber intelligence they use and consume. So we can measure an uplift, on Cisco, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, Darktrace. We can measure that uptick in performance. Many of them are sharing and buying and trading different types of threat intelligence. Oftentimes, that job of managing that threat intelligence to actually get the effect of prevention, as opposed to detect and respond, is expensive in people and money, and it doesn't work, because what we've seen is a huge uptick in victims over the past number of years. So what we're not saying that these guys are wrong. We're just saying that they may need to consume our intelligence to perform better, and that is the return on investment upgrade that we think that enterprise needs.
So shouldn't your technology is so fundamental, evidently, then, to global security on the internet? Shouldn't it be something that governments and enforcement, the security enforcement agencies should be sort of running and making available to everyone in a way, so that we can all be protected?
In a way, possibly, but what we're doing is making our technology available to defence and law enforcement, so that they can actually get to the job of defence and law enforcement. They need to defend that. We need to defend them first, because actually they are also victims and targets for the attacks that are being launched out of the dark space. So disabling law enforcement and disabling government is a nation state. I wouldn't say an epidemic, but it's definitely it's definitely something that they do. So protect those guys first, because in effect that's what we need to do. And also remember that most of those governments do have cyber war fighting capabilities, so they actually also want that intelligence. To protect themselves. So we're a private enterprise. We're not in it for fun. We're in it to create let's say $1 billion startup company, which I think we will achieve, and that's my aim for the company. And also, we will only work with those organisations that are within NATO, so friendlies, in effect, the enterprise is a very, very distributed. It's not what it used to be. So it's hybrid. It incorporates web-based compute. It's offloading and outsourcing to service providers, and including outloading workload like compute to Amazon, for example. So, but the responsibility and the accountability for the resilience of an organization rests fairly and squarely with the board of the commercial enterprise. And it's those people that need to buy us to protect them.
Well, it sounds like you've got a bit of a killer weapon there, or if you've got the next generation of protection on the internet, then that's sort of a bit of a silver bullet, isn't it? I mean, that's going to be.
Well, nothing is a silver bullet in the world, because you don't know how the world changes. Eddie Obeng, who kind of is also a good friend of mine, and also he taught me two things. One is never place or misplace concreteness. Yeah. Because you don't know what changed at midnight. He calls it the world after midnight. So if you look at it, his perspective is the world did change last night at midnight, and it always changes every day at midnight. And I think it's a great piece of philosophy to look at the way that 0 Day Live works. Yeah. So we know the world changes every day at midnight. We know that the dark web changes and the light web changes, technology changes, business changes, all kinds of things change, at midnight. So basically, what we've developed is something that actually works consistently, close to that, very close to that particular clock speed. And one of the issues, obviously, that stems from being able to have an internet that works at light speed also means that crime happens at light speed. And particularly,
Jane, there's a lot in the cyberspace who make bold claims. I think the one thing where we are is we do make bold claims. We can back up what we say. Our effectiveness in actual support of security decisions made, all the brands you mentioned, right, is that we can uplift on their cybersecurity, because we're looking in a different direction. We're looking towards the adversary. We can evidence notable attacks over the last 2 years. We can go through and do the anatomy of those, and where our clients were protected against the viruses that hit others. Lockbit 2 is a notable example of autumn last year, which hit a number of organizations quite significantly. We could show the anatomy of the evolution of that weapon and where our customers were protected against that weapon, because at the time of the evolution in the June, the July, and the August, where these really got nasty and Steeler components were added, we were the only company in the world that was looking at them. And the thing about the weapons is that when they become really potent, they are used within 2 to 3 weeks. So the timing of use is so critical, and the timing of being able to provide immunization is so critical. So, clearly we will promote what we're doing. But actually, Chris and I thought very long about what we did next, and we were drawn to the Blackwired proposition. Because frankly, it's the first time since my days in the army I feel I'm in a noble space. People and businesses and communities and governments are getting crushed. When we went through the story with the founder about what he was looking to do and what he had achieved in law enforcement and government, that's what drew us to get involved. This is something that's applicable everywhere. Chris talked to vaulting, but banking, healthcare, aviation, insurance, it's applicable everywhere. So of course we're going to speak strongly about how much we believe in it, but everything we say we can measure, and that's the difference. And that's what's just recently, and Chris, you're going to shut me down, but we've just been put forward by the DCMS, the government body, for the Innovation Award this year. We're in the space, and these guys really know what they're talking about in their assessment. So
that's interesting.
Super exciting space. But really, we feel.
So are you these techniques that you've developed? Are you saying they couldn't really be developed by anyone else out there in the market? Have you got?
They couldn't be copied. They cannot be copied readily, because of what Chris is saying. Is these are 8 years in the making. The algorithms that form the basis of what we do is representative of how military analysts would operate, and they've been built up and enhanced over the 8 years to get to this point, to bring it into the enterprise sector, that it's so strong. And intelligence is perishable, so you can take the intelligence one day, but it's no use three weeks later, particularly in that cycle. So the work that we have done would take years to replicate, is our strong belief, and that is what we're hearing also from the marketplace.
Yeah.
Okay. Won't the hackers, by definition, always be one step ahead?
By definition, weapons always defeat defense. Yeah, but if you start with the weapons as we do, that one step becomes maybe half a step. Yeah,
we both study military. And this is like getting behind enemy lines. Is finding out what they're doing. Is watching what they're doing. Some of the access has taken years to achieve in its own right. To be listened to the chatter of what is being discussed next. And if you think military, you can really think of your David Sterling in the Western Desert, and I don't want to, of thinking differently, get behind enemy lines, disrupt, and that's what this is doing in cyber terms. Is getting in behind, finding out what's going on with a very, very different lens.
Yeah,
but the military strategists thought that. Almost universally thought that Russia would succeed in conquering Ukraine in 3 days. I mean, they're completely wrong.
Well, they did, but how much intelligence did they have about what was going on, and how much intelligence was released to folks? So we have no transparency on that intelligence chain at all. We don't know. I can't confirm it. We don't know. All we know is what we see. And what we can see is that the preparations for that were happening with false flag operations against NATO and our forces were happening months before.
Yeah, so they were right about the invasion, but they were completely wrong about the impact.
Well, yeah,
there are parallels in your world as well.
Oh, I would not want to, our CEO and others may be able to comment on that directly, but I wouldn't want to comment on that really. But what I would do is give you another example, Jane, of what's happened because of my experience in financial services. So the European Banking Association, the British Banking Association said that that banks needed to operate multi-factor authentication. Yeah, because that was a way of actually almost eliminating fraudulent use for online access for mobile phones, etc., etc. Actually, we see that a number of weapons have been produced that defeat multi-factor authentication. And you've just seen an example of that in terms of Okta, which is obviously one of the biggest multi-factor authentication providers, service providers on the planet. Right? So what we see is that development happen real time, yeah, and then we send the defense for that into our organization. So that's an evolution. There's another evolution around zero trust. Everybody talks about zero trust, but they don't understand it. I've patented data center technology in zero trust. They don't really understand what that is, and unfortunately, zero trust authentication and authorization is also compromised, severely compromised. I'm not saying that to be scary in any way, but you have to listen to what's going on. You have to have observation on what's going on to see how that your future is already being compromised by folks whose only job it is to attack you. Yeah, they're not supporting a business. They're not supporting a balance sheet. They're not supporting shareholders. All they're doing is building and spending 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, working out how to attacking you, and getting that job done. So that's the real difference. Some might say, and I mentioned to the former director of the NSA that we work with. I said this is asymmetric warfare, guerrilla warfare against against the enterprise. Asymmetric being a small force with knowledge superiority, weapons and tactics superiority, attacking a bigger enemy and being successful at it. So it's it really is that case. So you have to decide whether or not you're going to persist with the detect and respond, because it's very, very wasteful, and it's unsupportable going forward, or you're going to screen as much of those attacks out. Using our kind of technology. But you can also use our technology incidentally. It's being used also in the recovery phase, where somebody has also been cyber attacked, because the same information, the same data that we send to them for defense can also be used in their dark trace and so forth to illuminate where fragments, if you like, of the weaponry, the malware, and so forth are hiding in the client's estate. Because we also see that once you've been cyber attacked, you're highly likely to be cyber attacked again.
Yeah. What about, yes, I realise we're coming to the end of our time, so perhaps just a final question. Could you look into your crystal ball and maybe make a bit of a forecast as to how you see all this developing in the next five to 10 years?
Yes. So but the crystal ball would be that the key things are transparency and oversight on two particular areas. One being cyber, and the other one being crypto. They are the two most significant problems in the world today, because we have no oversight. No transparency on those areas to speak of, but also we have no means to control them, no means to apply enforcement, and we don't have effective standards in place. And even if we did, we couldn't enforce them. So what I can see in my crystal ball is that that there will be investment in two things. There will be investment in being able to achieve transparency in those two environments, from which regulation will be developed, and the regulation and compliance and enforcement will be inflow of transactions as opposed to bolted on the side. Yeah. So I think that will be my prediction for the next 5 years. And we hope that we're going to be providing the mechanisms by which we make good regulation, good enforcement, and we also make great decisions that help everybody based on the data spheres that we have oversight of in both those areas, which is crypto and which is cyber and crypto.
Well, thank you very much, Chris and Iain. I think that's all we have time for now, but it's been a fascinating discussion, and I look forward to seeing the progress of your organisation, of Blackwired, and how these things do pan out. And hopefully you will continue to be able to put these measures in place, which will protect us all from what could otherwise be a very disturbing situation.
Absolutely, and I'd love to continue to obviously contribute to the information technology delivery company, and also to to get these kind of stories covered out, because they are important.
They are very much so. Yeah, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you, Jane.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you, Jane.
You too.
All right.
Bye.
Bye then.
Bye.